Thank you so much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and welcome to this webinar, CELA at Your Fingertips. Um, this is a webinar that we intended to be useful, hopefully, for both Braille learners or people who are just starting their journey with Braille and the people supporting them, such as educators or parents or librarians that want to know more about Braille and want to support their patrons, but also for long-time Braille users that might be looking for tips and tricks or information about details about CELA's Braille services. So I hope there will be something for everyone today. As we mentioned, we'll leave the questions for the end of the webinar. And in the meantime, here are a few useful Zoom shortcuts. To raise or lower your hand, you can, on Windows, press Alt plus Y, Option plus Y for the Mac, or Star plus 9 on your phone if you're joining by phone. To mute or unmute is Alt plus A, or on the Windows, Command Shift A on the Mac, and Star plus 6 if you are on your phone. You can also open or close the chat window with the shortcut Alt plus H on your computer and Command Shift H on the Mac. Okay, so next slide. Let's move to the agenda of what we're going to talk today about. First of all, a short overview of what is Braille. Then we'll move on to the question of how is Braille relevant in our times with all the technology and alternatives that we have available. Then a bit of historical context. Who was Louis Braille and how did the Braille writing code come to exist? Then we'll move on to the various Braille formats and codes. And then we'll get to CELA's collection of Braille materials and also discuss an overview of what we have available in Braille, and then some strategies of how to get the Braille you need. And I will do some demonstrations of some of the search capabilities and filtering capabilities of CELA. Then we'll have we'll talk about ways to support Braille literacy and encourage Braille literacy. And there is at the end a slide with various organizations and references for more information. And then it will be your turn for questions and discussion. Next. So let's discuss Braille. What is Braille? Braille is a writing system of raised dots that you can read with your fingertips. And the basic Braille cell is composed out of 6 dots arranged in two vertical columns of 3 dots. So it's like a rectangle. The different combinations of dots, they can represent letters, words, punctuation, math symbols, computer code, music code, you name it. Basically, Braille is the equivalent of print. So whatever you can print, you can Braille. Now, there are relatively small numbers of Braille readers in Canada. And as you will see, though, it is still a critical, important option to be offered for the people who use it. The reasons for this relative small number, there are a few of them. So first of all, blindness is somewhat less common among young people, and in general, people who lose their vision later in life, some often might not necessarily learn Braille. There is the issue also that maybe educators themselves might sometimes be less familiar with Braille, and it is now with all the technologies of screen readers and screen magnifiers, one might assume that they can be an alternative, and it's easier for an educator. They can just read the screen, and so it's in a way might appear as the simpler and better option, but as you will see, it is not. Next. Um, so as we said, Braille, how is Braille relevant in our times? Braille is, as we said, equivalent to print. So having access to Braille is no more, no less than access to literacy. We have included here two quotes, one from an international organization representing people who are blind, so the World Blind Union. And they say, we need to be careful to present Braille not as a code to be deciphered, not as something that sets people apart, but as a method of reading and writing that is equivalent in value to print for the sighted. The second quote that we have here is from a girl named Melody who participated in the annual creative writing contest that is organized by the CNIB, creative writing in Braille, I should say. And she says, Braille has enabled me to write, read, and identify my things. So, you know, that's is very eloquent. Now, I should say, of course, I would not be able to give this webinar as easily without having access to my Braille notes that I read while I talk to you. So Braille is not special. It's not more difficult than print. It's just less common, and it is. There are things that you can, of course, you can use a screen reader, but you will never understand the nuances of grammar, or you know, there are words that are written the same way, and there are sound the same way, but are written differently. And any details about when you want to proofread a document, these are all things that are not as easily understandable, or get understanding of using punctuation effectively. These are all nuances that are very hard to come. They're not impossible to understand, but it's much less intuitive to do it when you only have access to a screen reader that reads out loud what's on the screen. Further, you know, it is essential if you're pursuing a scientific education, or if you want to write computer code, you need to be able to check character by character what you're doing. So that's where Braille becomes essential. Equally so for complex music. As Faline mentioned, I'm a professional musician as well, and I learned all my scores for classical music in Braille, something that you could do by ear, but really with quite some limitations. Research suggests that people with vision loss who use Braille in generally have a higher rate of education and also employment. Next. So we'll move on a bit to historical context. Next. So, you know, nothing is created in a vacuum, and it's not like Louis Braille woke up one morning and said, look, I'm going to invent a writing with dots for blind people. This all comes in a continuum, and so I wanted to give you a bit of an overview. We cannot talk about Louis Braille without mentioning a very important figure, a historical figure that opened the way for him, so to say, Valentin Hauy. He was a distinguished linguist, and he spoke more than 10 languages, in fact, and became the interpreter to Louis XVI. And as you will see, the contacts that he had in the aristocracy will serve him well, and the blind people as well. I should say also that Valentin Hauy, he was influenced by the ideas of the time, because it was in the age of Enlightenment, and the idea of universal access to education started to become prevalent among the intellectuals of the time. He was galvanized, so to say, in 1771 when to do something about education of the blind, when he witnessed kind of a very derogatory mock parody show that was put on by some beggars in a cafe in Paris, and they were kind of parodying playing instruments badly and making growling, yowling sounds, and people were laughing at them. So he thought there's got to be a better way for these people to contribute to society. And sure enough, he started to think about ways to educate them. And in 1784, he met uh, uh, Theresia von Paradis. She was a prodigy musician, a young blind piano player. She came from a very affluent family, which enabled her to actually have a printer, a special printer made especially for her that would emboss the shape of the printed letters so that she could read them with her fingers. So that probably was one of the first instances of that he had a chance to see how a blind person could use their fingers to read. He also met his first student, Francois Le Sueur. He was a blind beggar who was very prodigious at recognizing coins, different coins with his fingers. So he thought that he had potential. So funny enough, he paid him to educate him because he wanted him. He saw his potential, and he thought he would be a good student to illustrate his theories with. He continued publishing and discussing his methods and gaining support from his intellectual peers and from the aristocracy. And sure enough, in 1786, that's a mistake. Yeah, 1786, he created the Institution Royale des Jeunes Aveugles. So this is basically the first school for the blind, which, as we will see, is the school that was frequented by Louis Braille. Next. So we will move on to Louis Braille himself. He was born on January 4th, 1809, in Couvray in Paris, close to Paris, I should say. When he was 3 years old, he had an accident in his father's leather working shop. And at the age of 10, he starts his education at the Institution Royale des Jeunes Aveugles that I talked about earlier. There, he has the opportunity to learn about what Charles Barbier, he is a colonel in the army, and he invented the écriture nocturne, night writing, and what that it was also a writing using dots, more dots. It was a larger cell, 9 by 9, and he originally intended it, among other uses, for soldiers so that they could pass on to each other codes at night without having to turn on a light and thus betray their position. So, but he was also aware very much of the potential of this writing opening doors for educating people, blind people. In 1826, Louis Braille starts to also teach at the school. So he was quite young, and he was already becoming a teacher at the School for the Blind while he started working on his own version of writing with dots. And in 1829, he publishes the first Braille book, Method of Writing Words, Music, and Plain Song by Means of Dots for use by blind people and arranged for them. This was a milestone, and it's interesting to know that indeed, he, being a great musician himself, he developed music code and the alphabet at the same time. In 1834, he completed the music code that is basically still used in our some changes, of course. 1852, he passes away and lives, but his legacy endures. Next, now let's discuss a few types of Braille. Basically, because we have only 64 combinations of dots with the 6 dots that we have at our disposal, they can have different meanings in different languages. So we have different versions of code depending on what language of Braille writing, depending on the language that is being used. because some languages have accents, some may not. However, one of the common traits for most languages is that there are two types of Braille. They have contracted and uncontracted Braille. What does that mean? Uncontracted Braille is basically print spelled out letter by letter, meaning that for each letter is going to be represented in Braille one at a time. Braille learners usually start by learning this uncontracted Braille, although there is some debate, especially in the English Braille learning landscape, education landscape, that it might be beneficial to start contractions as early as possible, almost right away. Contracted Braille, it uses special characters called contractions, and one character can stand for a group of letters or for an entire word. And for example, in English, of course, these are language specific because the types of contractions and the needs for contractions are specific for each language. For example, in English, we have the word knowledge, and you just write the word letter K. And when it's standing on its own like that, it means knowledge. So you can see that the advantage of using contracted Braille, it basically makes reading faster because you can, their information is more compacted under your fingers. Also, especially when you're embossing Braille on paper, it is, because the characters are larger, it generally takes many volumes for the same book. So it really helps when you can contract and make it more compact. So it's a bit more manageable. Of course, now, as you will see with technology, it's a little less important in terms of the compactness, but the speed for reading, for sure, it makes a difference. I'm using currently now a contracted English Braille. As I mentioned, Braille is specific to different languages, and after in time, after Louis Braille invented the main code, there are different variants that continue to exist, even among the same language. We have different flavors of Braille, so to say, between UK and the US. However, in time, as globalization becomes more important in our times, and also in the advances in technology, that means that there is more technological need for technological writing. And a more exact representation of the print. And so by creating a more standardized version, which is called the UEB, Unified English Braille, it addresses this need for globalization and standardization, so you can exchange materials. In fact, there is this great Marrakesh Treaty that people all over the world, you can share materials that are meant for the blind. So having a more standardized version of English Braille is beneficiary for exchanging information and sharing materials. There is the equivalent in French. They also have attempted this standardization of codes from different French-speaking countries. CBFU, the Code Braille Français Uniformisé, would be the equivalent. Okay, moving on. We have the music Braille. As I already mentioned, it is something that I use every day, but more importantly, it's interesting to know that it is not just the notes that are represented in Braille, but just as in print, you can write everything, all the aspects of a music score, be it the keys, the fingerings, dynamics, you name it. So all these can be represented in Braille. Moving on. We have here Braille and technology. In our times, now we have the advent of the Braille displays, and I would say that I am also right now using a Braille display, and I still remember with horror the days when I would use a Braille typewriter and emboss type on a paper, and then I would forget a word or a measure in a piece of music, and I would need to just start over the whole Braille page because there was no way to insert anything in that Braille page. So I would say that the advent of the Braille display is like the arrival of electronic word processors or e-readers also, because I can, with my Braille display, read everything that is on a screen. I will, without further ado, ask Faylene to start a video so you can see a Braille display in action, which might be more interesting than having me try to make sure that I'm framing my Braille display correctly.
1 in 7 people in Ontario have a disability. That's 1.85 million Ontarians. By 2036, that number will rise to 1 in 5 as the population ages. Currently, 1 in 11 Canadians aged 65 or older are living with vision loss. At CNIB, Debbie Gillespie sits at a computer working with a Braille display at her fingertips. What is a Braille display?
A Braille display allows people who have no vision, unable to read print, letters, and text, the ability to read and write independently without using audio. A Braille display, such as this one, can be used in conjunction with speech as a screen reader or on its own by a deafblind person. If you're using a Braille display, the most powerful things to do with it are editing. You're able to move the cursor to wherever you want on the screen. You're able to move the Braille display along the text and in the document that you're looking at. There are different types of Braille displays, and many of them allow a person to either use a computer to make the edits or edit right using the Braille display. You're able to connect to your computer, either a laptop or desktop, or an iPhone, that allows a person to read in Braille what appears on the screen. Some Braille devices allow you to also enter text right from the device on the display, and it will show up on the computer screen.
What is a computer screen reader?
Okay, so that's it for
Computer screen reader.
we can, yeah, thank you. Braille displays are quite expensive, but efforts are being made to bring down the cost, and there are, in fact, just some new ones that came out recently, and maybe in the question period we can discuss if anybody is interested in any Braille news or discussing tech tips. For example, there are certain Braille displays also that can play audiobooks. In fact, recently there was an update to the HumanWare Braille displays that can allow you to read books from CELA, audiobooks from CELA as well, using it like a daisy player. Okay, so these are the Braille displays. We will move on. Let's move on to what CELA has to offer in terms of Braille. First of all, we have the embossed Braille. So books that are printed on paper, like they're embossed with dots on paper, and they're being sent to patrons by mail. And the nice thing is that they are brailled on demand specifically for each patron, so they do not need to be returned. They can be recycled after use. So that's the first type of Braille. Moving on, the next one is print Braille, and that is a very interesting tool for encouraging literacy in young kids. These are picture books with text and also with captions of the pictures that are included in Braille, so that although you might not be able to see the picture, you can read the caption. So they're ideal either for kids learning Braille or for longtime Braille readers reading two-sighted kids. So you can enjoy it kind of creates a bridge between sighted and print disabled readers. The sheets are transparent, the sheets of Braille, so that you can see the print and the pictures with their fingers. So they are great, great tool for encouraging in a fun way access to literacy. They need to be returned to CELA, so you can have them on loan for 6 weeks. So the latest by 6 weeks, you need to return them to to us, send them back. Okay, next we have the electronic books that are ideally suited for Braille displays. They are created in what's called the BRF, the Braille Ready format. They can be read autonomously, so you can either have them on a computer and connect the Braille display, but you can read them directly autonomously on your Braille display once you load them onto it. Most modern Braille displays can do this. You can also emboss them if you should have a Braille printer yourself. You can use the BRF files to emboss them on paper Braille. Moving on. So we have, of course, I mean, anything that is text from CELA can be read, like including newspapers, but I wanted to talk a little bit specifically about magazines. There are some popular text magazines in text format that you can read using your Braille display, connecting it to your favorite smart device or computer. But also there are some actually Braille magazines that are produced directly in Braille for special interest magazines, and they are on various topics such as technology or music and others. And you can read them either in the Braille Ready format on your Braille display, or if you subscribe to them, you can get them as embossed Braille sent to you. Let's move on. Now we have, how is Braille produced? In general, there are two ways of producing Braille. Human transcription is more expensive and takes longer to produce. However, it is more precise and it can convey more complex formats. So if you have a book that has technical notation or where the layout becomes essential, then you cannot do without human transcription. However, we have also the computerized transcription, the automatic transcription, which is much faster. It is cheaper, and it can give quick access immediately to a larger variety of materials. However, of course, there will be limitations for formatting, and there is a larger risk for transcription errors. So they will not work well if the material is more complex. We indicate in our catalogs, CELA indicates what type of Braille transcription it is used. So you can make sure to choose the one that is most suited to you. And we'll discuss later how you can fine tune your search preferences, etc., to make sure you get the type of Braille that you want. CELA adds human transcribed Braille, and also we have the collection that comes from Bookshare from the US, and they enable us to add a lot of computer transcribed Braille. Oops, I think I jumped a bit too far. Okay, so let's discuss a bit what can we do in terms of how can we make the most out of all these different types of Braille collections. I will first do a quick overview and then I'll do some demonstrations. There are a few things you can do. Firstly, as I mentioned before, you can make sure that you have access to a wider variety of materials by making sure that you are subscribed to the Bookshare books that are offered through CELA. And for that, you need to be eligible, you need to submit a proof of disability as a patron. Libraries cannot have access to Bookshare themselves, but their patrons can. So you can, and so do the educators. Also, there is for people that you can reach out to our contact center and make use of the automatic title selection profiles. So you can specify your search preferences and your type of authors you like, and you will receive automatically chosen books without having to worry about how to choose them yourself. For those who want to have more control about what they're receiving, you can customize your search preferences or apply search filters, and this is what I will demonstrate shortly. And finally, I will mention the quarterly magazine, the Braille Books Acquired. So let's move on to customizing Braille preferences. And I will now attempt to share my screen. Just a second. I will make sure to also, for those who are using screen readers, select sound. Here we go.
Screen sharing meeting controls.
If
Share
Aline,
briefing
if you
WND.
could confirm that we are actually
Yes, we're on the
seeing.
main page
Nice.
of the website. Yeah.
One Microsoft Edge.
Okay, and hopefully you can hear JAWS. I will slow it down a tad.
Slower.
If anybody could confirm that we hear JAWS speak, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I can hear it.
We are now on the CELA homepage. To save time, I have already logged in to my account. I will now use a special feature to invoke a list of links.
Links list dialog. Links, my account.
And I will
7.
go to my account.
Enter. Loading page. Virtual PC cursor. Loading complete.
Loading complete. Nice. So now we will go to search preferences. I'm going.
Links list. Search preferences. 10 of 12.
Okay. So I invoked the list of links and I pressed S for search.
Enter. Loading page.
And it went straight
Create
to search
preferences. CELA. Heading level 1. Create
search preferences. And here we have all sorts of options.
Heading group start. Heading level 2 collection.
We can choose
Bookshare checkbox not checked.
Which type of collection. We have Bookshare, and right now they are not checked. If neither Bookshare or CELA is checked, that means that both are active. It's just if I choose to only want to see books from CELA, then I would check the next one.
CELA checkbox not checked.
Let's move on to other types, and we have language filters, all sorts of types of age levels, but you also have Braille, and let's look at those.
Language heading level format heading level 2.
Format. Let's see at the formats.
Link about our format. Human narrated audio checkbox.
Human
checked.
narrated audio, synthetic audio. So this is
checked.
interesting for anybody because you can choose to not have synthetic audio appear in your searches.
Human transcribed Braille contracted checkbox checked.
So we have here human transcribed Braille,
human transcribed Braille uncontracted checkbox.
Contracted,
checked.
uncontracted,
automated Braille contracted checkbox.
automated
checked.
Braille contracted.
Daisy text checkbox.
And I should
checked.
say that all automated Braille that is currently in our collection is contracted. And well, you know, we have Daisy and other formats, but in terms of for our purposes, we wanted to look at Braille. Now let's go quickly and save these preferences.
Save button.
I went to the save button by pressing the letter B on my JAWS screen reader.
Space.
And I'm
Confirmation
activating.
dialog heading level 1.
So now these have been.
Your search preferences have been updated. Okay, and return to search preferences. Space.
Nice.
Loading page.
Now,
My account.
something
Page heading
similar
search.
you can do with search filters. So let's say here we have already filtered, told them these preferences, you can set them and forget them. But if you wanted, you can apply filters after the search is done.
Search by
I
title.
will just, I don't know,
edit.
let's say.
Enter. Search region. Search by title. Michelle. Jean. Enter. Alert. Sorry, there are no
Oh,
results.
really? Did I mistype this?
Resulted. Search by title, author, or keyword edit. Jean.
Oh, yes, I
Enter.
misspelled.
Search
Okay, sometimes
title,
rushing
author,
doesn't pay.
Dragging to top. Search by title. Enter. Michelle. Jean. Enter. Loading page.
Okay, so I have now searched for
Search
something, and
Escape. Heading
right
left
under
heading.
the search results,
La Belle Langley. Rome. Title search result. Same page link. Jump to filters.
we can jump underneath
Enter.
it to
Heading
the
level 2
filters.
filter result.
It's the same page
Do not
link.
apply my saved search preferences.
And I could
checkbox
even choose to ignore for this search only all the search preferences and start from scratch. And here we have all sorts of options in terms of format as
Bookshare
well.
checkbox.
Bookshare,
Book checkbox.
kind of similar as
English
the options.
checkbox, French checkbox, Spanish, adult check, child, preteen, synthetic, human narrated checkbox, not automated checkbox, not checked.
You see automated,
Human transcribed checkbox, not.
transcribed Braille. You see, so you have all these options kind of, it's just that now we apply them after the search is performed. We have something similar. The advanced search offers also ways to customize your search before you hit search. You can choose the advanced search. There is information in the handout and in the PowerPoint about how to do those. And I can recommend that we had another recording of a webinar about how to use a CELA using your keyboard, or how to use the page using the mouse, for more tips and tricks using the CELA website in general. I will
Screen sharing meeting controls. Alt
the
S.
screen share, and we can return to the webinar.
New. Resulted share PowerPoint slideshow CELA.
Let's see.
Slide 23 advanced search.
We discussed
slide 24 Braille
okay,
books
yes, I
acquired.
wanted to say a few words about the Braille Books Acquired magazine. That's slide 24. And this is a quarterly magazine that some might not be aware of, that we publish with all the new editions of the that have been added in Braille, in our Braille, in the CELA Braille collection. You can subscribe to it as an email when you go to, and I have the link in the handout, celalibrary.ca/newsletters. But also, if you're interested to receive it in Braille, for those that don't really want to bother with technology, you can get it in embossed Braille. If you get to the, oh, I should stop. I did stop sharing sound. Okay, good. Yeah, so it is possible to order it as an embossed Braille if you go to your My Account and then to your magazine subscriptions, and you can request it as a Braille book, Braille publication that will come to you by mail. A few ways to how can we support literacy? Literacy, as we said, it's an essential part of education, and basically Braille is, like we said, it's just much less prevalent. And if you think about how much print there is, like, literacy doesn't mean just the ability to read a book. It means so much more. It means you have print everywhere. You can have on products, on advertising, on room numbers in hotels. Everything is, there is so much print, and there are in many studies that prove that just the fact that you have all these opportunities to read print around you, it helps with acquiring literacy skills. So similarly, it would be great if Braille would be more prevalent in daily lives of readers, young and old. So because they have fewer opportunities, this is one of the hurdles, because they have fewer opportunities to encounter Braille in their daily life. As a library, for example, you could choose to maybe have some accessible signage that also includes Braille, just for reminding people that Braille is out there. And so that if they or anybody else they know might need at some point to look at alternative ways of accessing print, that just make people aware that Braille is out there. And there are accessible guidelines about how to create signage on the Braille literacy site that is included in the references. We have also, there are various ideas how to make Braille part of your daily life. You can label items in your house. I certainly have, we have all these flat microwave buttons that unfortunately have no labels. And sometimes I put a short letter or something in Braille to make me remember which button is what. You can use, there are Braille play cards, game cards. You can add, there are gift ideas. You can get T-shirts using Braille, or even chocolates. So, it's nice to support people that are using Braille and make Braille feel like part of everybody's life. So it's not just something that sets them apart. Of course, I should mention the print Braille books again here that are a gateway to enjoying reading in Braille for young kids. Okay, so we're getting towards the end. Here is a last slide that I don't think I even will go too much into. There is a host of references about either education. There is also a Braille store where you could buy items. There are a list of educators or vision rehabilitation resources that can help you with Braille. Of course, it's important to raise awareness that if you're interested in Braille option, it's important to ask for it when you are talking to your vision VLR or something, so that they can support you. And I should say that also even the iPhone, Apple is a great supporter of Braille. I write on my iPhone using a Braille input method. So I use my Braille writing skills, and I can type faster on my iPhone than many people can text normally. So it's a great skill to have. Okay, without further ado, I'd be happy to conclude this webinar and leave room for questions, discussions, and it's your turn.